And so they had to then take drugs to lower uric acid level. Well, they took drugs to lower uric acid level, and the principal drugs are xyloprim, benamid, and they created certain kinds of crystals that dig into the muscles and tear the little muscle fibers. Unfortunately, there's no drug to take against that. So that we can't cure drugs with drugs. The side effects are many. Other problems from hypertensive drugs, it can force you into diabetes. The drugs can force you, on occasion, into kidney failure. Now, all these drugs would be acceptable if there was no other way to go. But yet our data on our first 900 patients indicate that of all the hypertensives that have come in, and there's over 200 that were diagnosed hypertensive by their physicians, that have been hypertensive for at least a year on medication. They came in with medication. In the 4 weeks' time, 85% were off their medication with normal blood pressures. Now, even if the 85% wouldn't hold, what if it's only 50%? What if it's only 25%? 25% out of 60 million means that 15 million people will never have to be on drug medication for the rest of their lives if they change their diet. So there certainly is a choice for hypertension. Now, one of the dreaded diseases, probably the most dreaded diseases, is cancer. And there are many kinds of cancers. There might be 75 kinds of cancers. But the principal cancers that kill us in these countries are lung cancer, which is number one, probably 70,000 people a year. But lung cancer is something that's sort of a predestined suicide. It's a form of suicide that you do voluntarily. So we don't take that too seriously. But we have colon cancer. That's about 40,000 deaths a year or so. We have breast cancer. These are the important cause of cancer. And altogether, cancer probably kills 300,000 people a year, about 16% of all deaths. It used to be thought that cancers are caused by viruses. And because of that, our government has spent, for research, probably $50 to $100 million a year for 20 years looking for the virus that causes these cancers. They've never found it. And now we're finding out that they may never find it, because we're finding the cause of these cancers seem to be foods that you eat. Colon cancer, for example, we find that in a high-fat diet, that a certain kind of bacteria grow in your large intestine. In your last 4 feet of tubing, we call it your large intestine, you have bacteria, little one-cell animals that grow. They've been there all your life. And on a high-fat diet, a certain kind grow there called anaerobic bacteria. They live without oxygen. They're nasty bacteria because when they eat your bile that comes out of your intestinal tract, they converted their excretion products to a cancer-producing substance called deoxycholic acid. They also convert it to estrogens, like female hormones. And Dr. Dennis Burkitt, one of the investigators in colon cancer, feels very strongly that the site where all of this deoxycholic acid, this poisonous excretion products from your bacteria and eat your bile, that the excretion products are right at the points where colon cancer is formed. That's where the colon cancer is formed. In countries that are on low-fat, low-cholesterol diets, these bacteria cannot live in your colon. It's not a favorable atmosphere. Instead, you have a different kind of bacteria that are favorable for you. They're called aerobic. They live with oxygen. And they cannot excrete this deoxycholic acid. They can't make it from bile. And they don't get the estrogens out as the other ones do. And therefore, colon cancer is rarely found, if ever. Dr. Burkitt said that in the hospitals he served in Africa, for 25 years, thousands of black people, he never saw one case of colon cancer. His first case of colon cancer came from a white man. So colon cancer turns out to be not a virus, not a pesticide, but just from your ordinary high-fat diet. And then we have lung cancer. Now, lung cancer, we realize, has to be initiated by cigarettes, or could be initiated by asbestos powder. It could be initiated by other dust. But cigarettes are a principal cause of lung cancer. But the surprising part that we find is that if you're not on a high cholesterol diet, your incidence of lung cancer may not be very much. Because we find in just the last short period of time that cholesterol has something to do with lung cancer. And that's a brand new finding. Because 10 or so years ago, when Dr. Jeremiah Stamler of the Chicago Board of Health tested his people from the People's Gas Company, he found that he couldn't figure out a relationship between the amount of cigarettes people smoked and lung cancer. But he did find a relationship between their cholesterol and lung cancer. If their cholesterol level was 275 or more, there were 7 or 8 times as many cases of lung cancer than if the cholesterol level was 220 or less. What does cholesterol level have to do with lung cancer? He didn't know, and neither did anyone else know. But there were 900 people in the study. It was a good scientific study, and there's no question that the lung cancer incidence was absolutely related and correlated to cholesterol level. If the cholesterol level went down below 150, you wouldn't find any lung cancer. Well, we learned about a year or two ago as to why this happened, because we find that high cholesterol blood paralyzes the white blood cell that eats cancer cells, the big macrophage, that big cell that could be almost 50 times larger than a red blood cell. It's an immense cell. It goes around through the tissues, in and out of the blood vessels, looking for things to eat that don't belong there, and it eats cancer cells. And that's why we realize now that high cholesterol blood, if it paralyzes these, that all you need is high cholesterol blood when you have cancer cells starting in the lung, and it just runs rampant, and you'll develop lung cancer. If you don't have high cholesterol levels, apparently then the incidence of lung cancer is far, far less. And now we can understand more that in countries like Vilcabamba, Ecuador, and Soviet Georgia, where we see people 95 years old smoking, we can realize they must have low cholesterol levels, or they wouldn't be alive. We find out other things about cancer. For example, we find that the problem of breast cancer, which is the leading cause of death for women 35 to 55 years old. Why is the breast cancer so prevalent and only on countries on the Western diet? And on countries on the low-fat, low-cholesterol diet, breast cancer is practically unknown. Is it something hereditary only due to people who live in our kinds of countries? No, because we know that if Japanese women have a very low rate of breast cancer move to Hawaii or United States, the same sisters in the same family will develop breast cancer, whereas the other sisters in Japan are perfectly all right. Through a long series of investigations, we seem to find a relationship between the fat in the diet and breast cancer. And now one of the suspected causes are these anaerobic bacteria, the ones that only can grow on a high-fat diet, because they give off an estrogen. And the estrogens reabsorb back into your body. Normally we wouldn't worry about it, because so what if you reabsorb some estrogen back in your body? Let me tell you the effect of estrogens in the body that the body doesn't make. A 3.5-year-old girl used her mother's estrogen face cream, rubbed it all over her body for a couple months, and the reason they discovered she was doing it is because her breasts started to grow. They took her to a physician, and he examined her and found that her uterus looked like a normal adult female menstruating uterus at 3.5 years old. And yet she absorbed just a tiny amount of estrogen, 1/20th of the minimum low amount that you normally would have to have. How about the Planned Parenthood statistics? Women taking oral contraceptives and other estrogen, if they take it for 6 months, those who started were completely cyst-free in the uterus. After 6 months, 25% of the women now have cysts in their uterus. After 2 years, 80% have cysts in the uterus from the oral contraceptives estrogens. And we know that if you have uterine cysts, there's a 260% greater incidence of breast cancer. So we certainly can see that there's an influence on the oral contraceptives in breast cancer. Women that took diethylstilbestrol for controlling miscarriages, after a period of years, we find their breast cancer rate has increased over those who did not take it. Estrogens are a problem. And how about Premarin? Premarin is the estrogen taken to keep women young forever. If you've taken Premarin for 2 years or more, you get 400% greater incidence of cancer of the uterus. If you take it for 7 years or more, the incidence is 14 to 1. 1,400% more cancer of the uterus if you're taking Premarin than if you've never taken it. Estrogens stimulate the sex organs. They stimulate the uterus, the breasts, the ovaries, and that's why it's thought that estrogens are a potent force. And we know that by the age of menstruation. Why is it that girls now have their first menstruation at 10, 11, 12 years old, when for millions of years, developing the human race, the menstruation always happens 16, 17, 18, 19 years old? Why suddenly 10, 11 years old?